March 1945. Deep inside war-torn Germany, a young Canadian soldier stands alone in a muddy farmyard, hands raised high, surrounded by a ring of German rifles. The air is thick with tension. At least 15 enemy soldiers, maybe more, have their weapons trained on his chest. But instead of fear, something else flickers across his face, a small, unsettling smile. Then out of nowhere, he lets out a quiet chuckle. The German troops exchange nervous glances. They've seen desperate men before, but never one who laughs in the face of death. What they don't know is that in less than a minute, 19 of them will be dead, and the legend of the Laughing Devil will be born. This isn't just another war story. This is the true account of how one captured Canadian soldier flipped the script on his enemies, turning his own surrender into one of the most devastating counterattacks of the entire Rhine campaign. 19 Germans dead, 36 seconds. One man who refused to accept defeat even when the odds were impossible. How did he do it? What secret did he hide as he stood there smiling at his captors? And why do survivors still whisper his name nearly 80 years later? The answers will shock you. By March 1945, the war in Europe was reaching its breaking point. American and Allied forces had smashed through the Siegfried Line and were now pushing deep into the heart of Nazi Germany. The Rhine River, Germany's last great natural barrier, had been crossed in a series of daring assaults. Victory seemed close, but the reality on the ground was anything but easy. Every mile gained came at a staggering cost. The Germans, though battered and outnumbered, fought with the desperation of men defending their homeland. For the Allies, every farmhouse, every hedgerow, every fog-shrouded field could hide a deadly ambush. This wasn't the Hollywood version of World War II, with tanks rolling triumphantly through cheering crowds. This was brutal, close-quarters combat, room-to-room fighting, sudden ambushes, and relentless machine gun fire. The Canadian First Army, fighting side by side with American and British units, had earned a reputation as shock troops. Their aggressive tactics and refusal to back down made them both respected and feared, but that reputation came with a price. The Germans concentrated their toughest defenses against the Canadians, turning every advance into a bloodbath. In just the first week of the Rhine crossings, Allied forces suffered over 3,500 casualties. The Germans, even as their supplies dwindled, managed to inflict losses at nearly the same rate. This was no easy victory. It was a grinding, vicious campaign where death could strike from any direction at any moment. For soldiers on both sides, the Rhine campaign was a test of nerves, endurance, and raw survival instinct. And in the middle of this chaos, one Canadian soldier would soon make history in a way no one could have predicted. So who was the man at the center of this unbelievable story? Private Thomas "Tommy" Higgins wasn't born a hero. He grew up in the windswept prairies of Saskatchewan, a place where winter could freeze your breath and hard work was a way of life. The son of a wheat farmer, Tommy learned early that you don't quit when things get tough, you dig in and keep going. That stubborn grit would become his greatest weapon on the battlefield. Tommy didn't rush to enlist when war first broke out. By the time he joined up in 1942, the world already knew the true horrors of World War II. He wasn't chasing glory, he was answering a call. His two older brothers had already shipped out, and Tommy couldn't stand the thought of staying behind while they risked everything. After basic training, he was assigned to the Regina Rifles Regiment, a unit that would become legendary for its courage under fire. From the moment he landed on Juno Beach during D-Day, Tommy was thrown into the thick of the action. He survived the hellish fighting in Normandy, the flooded fields of Belgium, and the frozen nightmare of the Rhineland winter. By 1945, he was a battle-hardened veteran, respected by his fellow soldiers for his cool head and unbreakable spirit. But what really set Tommy apart was his sense of humor, a dark, almost reckless laughter that surfaced even in the worst moments. While shells exploded and bullets flew, Tommy would crack a joke or let out a laugh that cut through the fear. Some thought he was crazy. Others said his laughter kept them sane. In a world where death was always just a heartbeat away, Tommy's ability to find something to smile about made him unforgettable. And soon, that same fearless attitude would turn the tide in a way no one could have imagined. On a cold, foggy morning in March 1945, Tommy Higgins and his section received orders that sounded almost routine: clear a cluster of farmhouses near the Rhine River. Intelligence reports claimed the area was nearly empty, just a few scattered German stragglers, nothing serious. But in war, routine can turn deadly in an instant. As Tommy and his men crept through the muddy fields, boots sinking into the wet earth, a heavy silence hung over everything. No birds, no animals, just the eerie quiet that always comes before disaster. Visibility was terrible. A thick blanket of fog reduced the world to a gray blur, making it impossible to see more than a few dozen yards ahead. Every shadow looked suspicious. Every window could hide a sniper. The tension was electric. Then, without warning, the world exploded. Machine gun fire erupted from hidden positions, windows, barns, behind piles of farm equipment. The infamous German MG-42s unleashed a storm of bullets, their rapid-fire roar slicing through the fog like thunder. 2 Canadians went down instantly. The rest dove for cover, scrambling behind stone walls, ditches, and shell craters, desperate to avoid the deadly hail. In the chaos, Tommy became separated from his unit. He found himself alone, pinned down in a shallow depression, with German guns on all sides. Looking back, he saw his comrades trapped, unable to move forward or retreat. The Germans had them completely locked down. For most soldiers, this would be the end of the line, a hopeless situation with no way out, but Tommy wasn't most soldiers. As bullets snapped overhead and the ground shook with explosions, he started to hatch a plan. He knew that if he stayed put, he'd be finished. If he tried to run, he'd be cut down in seconds. There was only one way left: go forward straight into the jaws of the enemy. And as the fog swirled around him, Tommy Higgins prepared to do the unthinkable. Trapped, outnumbered, and cut off from his unit, Tommy Higgins faced a choice that would have paralyzed most men. The odds were brutal: at least 15 German paratroopers, all elite, all armed, and all convinced they had their prey cornered. But Tommy's mind was racing. He wasn't thinking about surrender, he was searching for any weakness, any opening. Any way to flip the script. That's when he noticed something the Germans hadn't. They were so focused on their victory, they'd let their guard down. They were already treating him like a prisoner, not a threat. Tommy knew he had to act fast. He slowly stood up, hands raised high, leaving his rifle behind in the mud. He forced a crooked smile onto his face, even let out a low, unsettling chuckle. The Germans hesitated, confused by this strange, laughing enemy. They shouted at him in broken English, demanding he surrender. Tommy nodded, playing the part, letting them believe he was beaten. As they closed in, patting him down for weapons, they missed the most important detail: the grenades still hidden under his jacket, clipped to his webbing, invisible beneath the folds of his uniform. Why did Tommy laugh? Maybe it was nerves, maybe it was defiance, or maybe it was the knowledge that he still had one last card to play. In that moment, he was gambling everything on a single, desperate move. He needed the Germans to relax, to cluster close, to believe the fight was over. Only then would he have a chance to strike back. It was a plan that bordered on madness, but in the chaos of war, sometimes the craziest ideas are the only ones that work. As the Germans gathered around, weapons lowered, Tommy's heart pounded in his chest. He counted 19 enemy soldiers within arm's reach, the perfect setup. In just a few seconds, the world would turn upside down. The Germans thought they had captured a broken man. They had no idea they were standing in the blast radius of one of the most daring counterattacks of the entire war. In the next 36 seconds, the quiet farmyard erupted into a scene straight out of a nightmare. Tommy Higgins, surrounded by 19 German paratroopers, dropped his hands in a flash. His fingers found the pins of 2 hidden grenades. For a split second, the Germans just stared, their brains struggling to process what was happening. Then chaos. With practiced precision, Tommy yanked the pins and hurled the first grenade straight at the German lieutenant and the cluster of soldiers near the farmhouse door. The explosion was deafening. a shockwave of fire and shrapnel that tore through the group, dropping men instantly. Before the first grenade even hit the ground, Tommy was already pulling the pin on a third, his movements fueled by pure adrenaline and months of combat experience. The second grenade flew into the barn window, silencing the machine gun that had pinned down his section. Flames and smoke billowed out, adding to the confusion. The third grenade landed among a group of Germans scrambling to bring their weapons to bear, but they were too slow, their hands shaking with shock and fear. Another blast, more bodies hitting the mud. The survivors scattered, some firing wildly, others diving for cover. But Tommy wasn't finished. He rolled across the ground, grabbed his fourth and final grenade, pulled the pin with his teeth, and lobbed it at a group trying to regroup behind a farm cart. The explosion shattered the cart and sent splinters flying. In the smoke and chaos, Tommy snatched up a fallen German rifle and fired twice, dropping the last two enemies who tried to stand. When the dust settled, the farmyard was unrecognizable. 19 German soldiers lay dead or dying. The air was thick with smoke, the ground torn up by grenade blasts. Tommy stood alone, chest heaving, uniform torn and bloodied, but somehow untouched by enemy bullets. In just 36 seconds, he had turned certain defeat into a stunning victory. His own section, finally able to break cover, rushed forward, only to stop in disbelief at the carnage and the lone figure who had made it all possible. The scene that greeted Tommy's fellow soldiers was almost impossible to believe. The farmyard was a wreck, smoke drifting through the air, grenade craters gouged into the mud, and the bodies of 19 German paratroopers scattered in clusters. Tommy stood in the center, breathing hard, his uniform streaked with dirt and blood, but alive. For a moment, nobody spoke. Even the toughest veterans were stunned by what they saw. Sergeant William Fraser, a man who'd survived 3 years of brutal combat, could only stare before finally asking, "What the hell did you do, Higgins?" Word of the incident spread like wildfire. Within hours, soldiers from other companies found excuses to pass by the farmhouse, drawn by the unbelievable story. Officers arrived to inspect the scene, counting the bodies, examining the blast marks, and trying to piece together how one man had pulled off such a devastating counterattack. Tommy's company commander wasted no time recommending him for the Victoria Cross, the highest military honor in the British Empire. The official citation would describe exceptional gallantry and resourcefulness in the face of overwhelming odds. But the impact went far beyond medals. The elimination of the German stronghold allowed Tommy's company to advance 3 hours ahead of schedule, capturing 2 more villages that same day with barely a fight. Those hours mattered. Every minute gained meant more ground covered, more momentum for the Allied push into Germany. At the regimental level, Tommy's actions became a case study in courage and quick thinking. Officers used the story in briefings and training sessions, hammering home the lesson: never underestimate the power of individual initiative, even in the darkest moments. On the German side, the story had a chilling effect. Surviving enemy soldiers began calling Tommy the Laughing Devil, a name that spread through the ranks. German intelligence reports warned that Canadian troops were not only aggressive but dangerously unpredictable, capable of turning even a surrender into a deadly trap. For the Allies, Tommy's story became a symbol of hope and resilience. For the Germans, it was a reminder that the enemy was relentless and nowhere was truly safe. Tommy Higgins' explosive counterattack didn't just change the course of a single battle, it left a mark that would follow him for the rest of his life. In the days after the firefight, Tommy's name was on everyone's lips. His company commander pushed for the Victoria Cross, the most prestigious military honor in the British Empire. But as the story spread, so did the questions. Some officers wondered if Tommy's fake surrender had crossed a line. Was it a brilliant act of survival, or did it blur the rules of war? In the end, his award was downgraded to the military medal. A high honor, but not the one many felt he deserved. For Tommy, the medal was never the point. He wore it when required, but otherwise kept it tucked away, rarely mentioning what happened that day. The real cost of his actions wasn't measured in ribbons or ceremonies. It was the weight he carried in his mind, the memories of those 36 seconds, the faces of the men he killed and the friends he saved. Like so many veterans, Tommy returned home with scars that didn't show. He never spoke about the war to his children, answering their questions with a simple, "I was a soldier," before changing the subject. The controversy around his actions didn't end with the war. Military historians and ethicists still debate whether Tommy's tactics were justified. Some argue that in the chaos of battle, survival comes first, and Tommy's quick thinking saved lives. Others point out that such actions can have consequences for future prisoners of war, raising tough questions about where to draw the line between heroism and desperation. But for those who were there, the answer was simple. Tommy's section knew he had saved their lives. The German survivors, too, remembered him not with hatred but with a kind of haunted respect. One wounded enemy, Hans Müller, later said, "War makes men into things they never wanted to be. I'm just grateful I survived." Tommy's story became a legend, but it was also a reminder. Every act of heroism in war comes with a price, and sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought long after the shooting stops. The story of Tommy Higgins didn't end on that muddy German farmyard. Decades later, his actions still echo through military history, shaping how soldiers and civilians alike understand the true cost of war. The farmhouse where Tommy made his stand is long gone, replaced by peaceful fields. But a simple stone marker stands in its place, a silent witness to the day one man's courage changed everything. Every year, fresh flowers, sometimes left by Canadian veterans, sometimes by local Germans, appear at the site, a quiet tribute to sacrifice and survival. Tommy's story became a staple in Canadian military training, but its lessons reach far beyond any border. In the U.S., where stories of grit and individual heroism are woven into the national identity, Tommy's actions resonate deeply. His story is taught in leadership courses and military academies as a case study in initiative, resilience, and the moral complexity of combat. It's a reminder that sometimes the difference between life and death comes down to a single decision made in the heat of the moment. But the legacy isn't just about tactics or medals, it's about the human cost. Tommy returned home, built a life, raised a family, and tried to find peace after the storm. Like so many American veterans, he carried the weight of his experiences in silence, choosing to honor the fallen by living a life worthy of their sacrifice. His daughter, speaking at the 70th anniversary of the Rhine crossing, summed it up best. "My father was a gentle man, a good neighbor, and a loving father." The war made him do things that haunted him forever. He never celebrated what happened here. He remembered it, honored those who died, and tried to live a life worthy of his survival. In the end, Tommy Higgins' story isn't just about one man or one battle. It's about the choices ordinary people make when history puts them to the test. It's about the price of freedom, the burden of memory, and the hope that by remembering, we can build a future where such stories are no longer needed. As Americans, as allies, and as human beings, we remember not to glorify war but to honor those who endured it, and to remind ourselves why peace is worth fighting for.